For 7 years of marriage, in the eyes of the prestigious Vance family, I was a useless woman who couldn't bear a single child. My husband, Julian Vance, was the CEO of Vance Enterprises, a corporate conglomerate with a market cap in the tens of billions, and his executive assistant, Khloe Adams, had miraculously birthed him 3 sons over the past 4 years, becoming the undisputed hero of the Vance dynasty. Facing the contempt of my in-laws and the whispers of New York high society, I endured in silence until one day at the wellness center of the Wellington Medical Pavilion, an elite private hospital in Manhattan, Julian Vance received news that would instantly shatter his world. The attending physician, staring at the genetic test report in his hands, spoke with a trembling voice. "Mr. Vance, according to the test results, you have an extremely rare congenital genetic defect. Simply put, you are entirely incapable of getting a woman pregnant." The color drained from Julian's face in a flash. He glared at Khloe, who was standing beside him, holding their youngest son. The triumphant, smug smile that usually graced Khloe's face froze, and her complexion turned as pale as a sheet of paper. Amidst the sudden chaos of gasps and terrified shrieks, Julian's 6 feet 2 inches frame stiffened and collapsed to the floor. He lost consciousness right then and there. Having rushed over after receiving a call from the hospital, I stood outside the hospital room door, watching the absolute pandemonium unfolding inside. It was the moment a truth I had long suspected deep in my heart was finally confirmed. This ridiculous 4-year-long theatrical farce was finally coming to an end. My name is Elena Vance. I am a daughter of the wealthy Sterling family and the legal wife of Julian Vance. For 7 years, I have been the nominal matriarch of the Vance family and simultaneously the biggest open joke among the city's elite. Why? Because in my 7 years of marriage, my womb had remained entirely empty. Meanwhile, my husband's capable, clever personal assistant, Khloe Adams, had popped out 3 sons at an astonishing speed. 3, the eldest, Liam, the 4-year-old middle child, Leo, and the youngest, Luke, who had just turned 3 months old. At this very moment, in the sprawling ballroom-sized living room of the Vance family's Upper East Side townhouse, a lavish sip and see gathering was being held for baby Luke. The crystal chandeliers were blindingly bright, and the air was filled with the scent of imported hydrangeas and high-end artisanal pastries. My mother-in-law, the matriarch Eleanor Vance, was holding baby Luke, swaddled in cashmere, laughing so hard she looked like she might burst. Every wrinkle on her face was smoothed out by pure, unadulterated joy and satisfaction. Beside her sat my father-in-law, Richard Vance. He maintained his dignified, intimidating aura, but the look in his eyes as he gazed at his grandson was absurdly tender. Khloe wore a bespoke champagne-colored silk dress. Her figure had bounced back flawlessly. She didn't look like a mother of 3 at all. With impeccable makeup and a modest smile, she was carefully greeting the close relatives of the Vance family. She already looked like the true lady of the house, and I, Elena, sat in the corner of the living room on a velvet sofa. In front of me was a glass of sparkling water. The ice long melted. I felt like an intruder who had walked into the wrong grand banquet. I was dreadfully out of place amidst the joy filling the room. Elena, my mother-in-law, Eleanor, approached me with the baby in her arms. Her tone sounded affectionate, but the underlying meaning was as sharp as a needle. "Don't just sit there. Come look at little Luke. He looks exactly like Julian did when he was a baby. These eyebrows, this nose, they're cut from the exact same cloth." I looked up, offered a standard polite smile, stood up and looked at the child. Pink pretty face. He was certainly cute. Did he look like Julian? Maybe. Through the baby's soft features, one could faintly see a shadow of Julian, especially in the way he pursed his lips. "You're right, mother. He's very cute," I agreed quietly. Eleanor sighed. She lowered her voice, but just enough so that the few people nearby could hear her perfectly. "Elena, I hate to be the one to say this, but you and Julian have been married for a long time, and there is still no news from your belly. Even though our family isn't old-fashioned, an empire this large needs proper heirs. Khloe might come from an ordinary background, but she's remarkable, and she is utterly devoted to Julian. Look how strong and smart these three boys are. She gently stroked the baby's cheek. Don't think too deeply about it. Just relax. They are all Vance grandsons anyway. If they call you Auntie Elena, it's virtually the same thing. Me. That word pierced my chest like an icicle. I was Julian Vance's legally wedded wife. Yet now in the Vance household, I had been reduced to a woman who could only be called Auntie by these three children. Right on cue, Khloe walked over. Her face bore a mixture of appropriate humility and barely concealed triumph. Mrs. Vance, please don't say that. Elena is Julian's wife and the true lady of the Vance family. The boys and I are just grateful to have a roof over our heads. Her words sounded accommodating, but her eyes brushed lightly over me. In them lay the pity of a victor and a subtle provocation. Julian. I raised my eyes to look at him. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows not far away. His back to the commotion of the living room, taking a phone call. His tailored Tom Ford suit accentuated his broad shoulders and long legs. His straight posture was still the dream of countless women. However, that back radiated an indescribable distance and exhaustion. In our 7 years of marriage, the first 3 might have had some warmth, but over the last 4 years, ever since Khloe gave birth to the first child, all that remained between us was an icy courtesy. The number of times he came home dwindled. When he did, he was mostly silent. The intimacy between husband and wife existed only in name. I used to think it was because I was inadequate. So, I desperately learned business management trying to merge into his world. I secretly visited countless top fertility specialists and drank vile-tasting holistic tinctures until I wanted to vomit. The stack of medical reports grew thick, but the results always said the same thing. I was perfectly healthy. Doctors carefully suggested that my husband should undergo a comprehensive evaluation, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. How could a man as fiercely proud as Julian Vance ever admit that there might be something wrong with him? Especially after Khloe had already proven his virility. And so all the pressure and all the blame were poured onto me alone. I carried the stigma of infertility for 7 years. Elena, have some tea, Khloe said gently, bringing over a freshly steeped cup of chamomile tea and offering it to me. It'll help you relax. You look a bit pale. I stared at her slender, pale fingers. Her nails were painted a sophisticated nude pink. It was these very hands. Over the past 4 years, they had slowly, silently clawed their way into my marriage and my home, stealing everything that should have been mine. I didn't take the tea. I just looked at her calmly. Thank you. I'm fine. Khloe's hand stiffened for a second, but she smoothly pulled it back, her smile flawless. Make yourself comfortable then. I'm going to go check on Liam and Leo. I don't want them interrupting their grandfather. She turned and walked away, the hem of her dress drawing an elegant curve. I watched her crouch down next to the 2 older boys who were playing with toys alongside their nanny, speaking to them affectionately. She looked like the perfect loving mother. My chest ached with a suffocating heaviness, but I couldn't break down. I was Elena Sterling, raised by an elite family. Even if my heart was a crumbling battlefield on the outside, I had to maintain my dignity. As the gathering wound down, the guests left one by one. The nanny took the 3 children upstairs to rest. My in-laws, looking tired, retired to the master suite. The massive living room was left with only me, Julian and Khloe, who was instructing the housekeeper on the cleanup. Khloe approached him, her voice dripping with honey. You must be exhausted. I had a bath drawn for you. I also had the chef make some organic bone broth. So have a little and get a good rest. Julian rubbed his temples, offering a dull hum of acknowledgement. His gaze didn't even flick in my direction. It was as if I didn't exist. I'm heading up, he said, turning toward the grand staircase. Khloe acknowledged him, then turned her head as if suddenly remembering I was there. Her face held a faultless smile. You should get some rest too, Elena. Shall I have the kitchen prepare something for you? No need. I stood up, straightening my back. Take care of yourself and your children. Without waiting to see her expression falter, I walked straight down the hallway leading to the guest wing. That was where my bedroom was, a room that felt more like a luxury hotel suite every day. Behind me, I heard Khloe let out a very faint sigh, just loud enough to reach my ears. It was full of manufactured helplessness and grievance. And on the stairs, I heard Julian's footsteps pause for a fraction of a second. The night air was as cold as water. I sat on the sofa in my locked bedroom, looking out at the shimmering lights in the Vance family's manicured gardens. Everything here was luxurious and exquisite, but devoid of a single ounce of warmth. My phone screen lit up. It was a text thread with my best friend from college, Sarah. The last message was sent by her an hour ago. Elena, I took my aunt to Mount Sinai for a checkup today, but we ended up at the Wellington Medical Pavilion in Manhattan. I swear I saw your husband Julian there. It was just a side profile walking by quickly, so I'm not 100% sure, but he was alone. No assistant, no kids. Isn't that weird? A guy like him usually has a concierge doctor come to the house, right? Julian went to a private clinic for a health checkup alone. My heart began to beat with a strange, rapid rhythm. An unexplainable premonition quietly wrapped around me like a vine. The Wellington was known as the most exclusive private medical facility in the city. Its main selling point was absolute privacy and VIP treatment. The people who set foot there were the ultra-wealthy or powerful. What they bought wasn't just healthcare, but ironclad non-disclosure agreements. Why would Julian suddenly show up there for a checkup by himself? Given his status, his annual physicals were usually done by a dedicated medical team clearing out an entire VIP floor at a regular hospital or done at home. He had no reason to go wait in line at a place like that. Unless it was something he absolutely didn't want anyone to know about, especially not the Vance family. As soon as that thought crossed my mind, I couldn't sit still. Early the next morning, I made up an excuse to leave the house and drove straight to the Wellington in Manhattan. The hospital's atmosphere was quiet and elegant, like a five-star hotel. The uniformed staff were polite and respectful, but their lips were sealed tight. I fished for information, but predictably I got nothing. Just as I was giving up and preparing to leave, my eyes caught a familiar figure in the corner of the first-floor cafe. It was Dr. Harrison. He was an old friend of my late father and one of the top reproductive geneticists in the country. Years ago, my father took me to a medical gala where I had briefly met him. I had heard he was headhunted by the Wellington for an exorbitant salary to head a high-end research lab. I hesitated for a few seconds before buying a coffee and walking over to him. Dr. Harrison, it's been a long time. Do you remember me? Hulda Sterling's daughter. Dr. Harrison looked up, pushed up his gold-rimmed glasses, and studied me for a moment. A warm smile spread across his face. Elena, my goodness, look at you. You're looking more and more like your father when he was young. What brings you here? Are you feeling unwell? I'm fine, Dr. Harrison. I sat across from him, rapidly organizing my thoughts. Actually, a close friend of mine has a sensitive issue and wants a consultation, but she's too embarrassed to ask the hospital directly. Dr. Harrison was an astute man. He instantly saw my hesitation and gave me an encouraging look. Take your time. What kind of issue? I took a deep breath and lowered my voice. Dr. Harrison, if someone were to undergo the highest tier of medical testing here, specifically involving reproductive systems or deep genetic profiling, how secure are those results? Dr. Harrison's expression turned serious. The Wellington's core principle is absolute patient privacy. Without written consent, no test report is ever disclosed to a third party, not even family members. We have multi-layered physical and digital security systems. Your friend has absolutely nothing to worry about. My heart sank. The high security level meant whatever tests Julian took were far from ordinary. What about male reproductive testing? I felt my throat go dry. Are there cases where everything looks perfectly normal on the outside, but there's a highly specific hidden risk factor, something that wouldn't show up on a standard test, but only on a genetic level? The light caught Dr. Harrison's glasses. He was silent for a few seconds before taking a sip of his coffee. Elena, there are no absolutes in medicine. A standard semen analysis only checks volume, motility, and morphology. To go deeper, you need a chromosomal karyotype analysis. Y chromosome microdeletion testing or specific single gene defect screening. These require specialized genetic testing. Some problems are indeed hidden very deeply. He looked at me meaningfully and added, and some hereditary genetic defects are congenital. If the carrier doesn't do targeted testing, they might live their entire life without knowing. It only reveals itself when they face absolute infertility. Congenital genetic defect. Those words exploded in my mind like thunder. Khloe's 3 sons. Julian's increasingly cold back. My in-laws' disdainful glares. The mockery of high society. Countless fragmented scenes twisted together forming a single blood-chilling possibility. If Julian truly know, that's impossible. If that were true, where did Khloe's children come from? There were 3 of them. 3 living, breathing boys. But what if those 3 boys were never Julian's to begin with? The thought was so insane, so horrifying that my hands and feet instantly turned ice cold. Dr. Harrison, I modulated my voice to keep it from shaking. If someone had the kind of rare genetic issue you mentioned, making reproduction theoretically impossible, but someone next to him kept having his children, what would that mean? Dr. Harrison's face darkened completely. He sat down his coffee cup and leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping very low. Elena, your questions have crossed the line of a general medical consultation. Medically speaking, it could mean a freak testing error. But at the Wellington, the chance of that is practically 0. Or he paused, looking straight at me with a piercing gaze. Or it means the biological father of those children is someone else, and the party in question is likely the victim of a meticulously designed, extremely malicious fraud. Khloe's gentle, submissive face. The lavish affection my in-laws poured onto her and the kids. Julian's tolerance toward her because of the children. What if all of it was built on sand? What if it was all erected on a colossal lie? I don't know how I walked out of that cafe or how I got back into my car. Sitting in the driver's seat, my hands were still trembling slightly. Just then my phone rang. Julian's name flashed on the screen. I stared at the title husband, a word that suddenly felt deeply satirical. I answered the call but didn't speak. Julian's voice came through. It was lower than usual with a faint, barely noticeable hoarseness. I won't be home for dinner. I have an important international board meeting. It was as concise as always. A notification, not a conversation. In the past, I would have quietly replied, "Understood, don't overwork yourself." Or added, "Make sure you eat properly." But today, I remained silent for 2 seconds before calmly opening my mouth to ask a completely unrelated question. "Julian, you were at the Wellington Medical Pavilion yesterday afternoon, weren't you?" The line went dead silent. It took several seconds before Julian's voice returned, laced with obvious tension and the anger of someone whose sore spot had been poked. "Are you having me investigated?" "I'm not investigating you," I replied, noting how unervingly calm my own voice sounded. "A friend happened to see you and told me. Why were you at the hospital? Are you feeling unwell?" It was just a routine checkup. His tone was rigid, his anxiety bleeding through the harder he tried to hide it. "Elena, you don't need to concern yourself with my business. Just do what a Mrs. Vance is supposed to do." What a Mrs. Vance is supposed to do. What was that? To magnanimously tolerate my husband's secretary popping out kids while I played the dignified barren trophy wife. Years of grievance, anger, and the sharp agony brought on by my horrifying new theory all surged to my head at once. "Julian." Cut him off. My voice was very low, but every word was clear. "What exactly are you hiding?" "What?" His voice suddenly spiked. I gritted out, forcing strength into my trembling body. "What kind of test did you go to the Wellington for? Does it have something to do with the children?" "Elena," he snapped fiercely. Even through the phone, I could imagine his face turning pale with rage. "Are you insane? What nonsense are you spouting? You have no right to question my affairs. Remember your place. My place. My place. The pathetic Mrs. Vance who couldn't have children and got scolded just for asking what medical test her husband took. Fine, I won't ask. I suddenly laughed. The laugh was laced with infinite coldness. Julian, I sincerely hope it was just a routine checkup. I hope to God I'm just overthinking everything. Without waiting for his reaction, I hung up. It was the first time in 7 years I had hung up on him. Gripping the steering wheel, I watched the people passing by on the Manhattan sidewalks. My heart beat heavily against my ribs. Julian's reaction on that call practically confirmed my suspicions. He panicked. He was desperately trying to hide something. He definitely didn't go to the Wellington for a routine physical. And the results must have been terrifying. If so, Khloe and those 3 kids, a plan began to take shape in my chillingly cold heart. I couldn't just sit there and take the hit. I couldn't let this filthy, grotesque lie continue to swallow my life. I needed proof. Hard evidence that would leave no room for the lies to hide, and the breakthrough might not be with Julian or Khloe at all. I started the car and changed direction. I didn't return to the suffocating Vance townhouse. Instead, I drove to a luxury apartment complex in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I remembered that Khloe's equally capable younger brother, Tyler Adams, lived there. Thanks to his sister's elevation in status, Tyler had been rising rapidly through the ranks of Vance Enterprises over the last few years. I had heard Julian trusted him quite a bit. How does a young guy with 0 connections rapidly gain the CEO's trust and get placed on major corporate projects just because his sister gave birth to the boss's kids? That alone was highly suspicious. I didn't confront Tyler directly. That would only put them on high alert. Instead, I used my own connections and hired a trusted private investigator, Detective Cole. Within a few days, I had my hands on Tyler's movements for the past 6 months and a portion of his financial records. Julian would never have dreamed that his supposedly submissive, incompetent wife had been quietly investigating him from the shadows. According to Cole's dossier, Tyler lived a flashy lifestyle. He had traded his Honda for a Porsche, and he frequented various high-end private clubs. However, his social life wasn't particularly wild. Aside from necessary business networking, the people closest to him were his sister Khloe and a few mid-level managers at Vance Enterprise subsidiaries. On the surface, he looked like the classic young professional clawing his way up via nepotism. But then I noticed several subtle recurring charges on his credit card statements. Payments to multiple maternity and baby boutiques, high-end pediatric clinics, and children's photography studios scattered across New York. The amounts weren't massive, but the frequency was consistent, almost monthly. All expenses for Khloe's children were handled by a supplementary black card provided by Julian or directly managed by the Vance family's estate manager. Julian was never stingy. Everything the kids got was top tier. Khloe herself received an exorbitant allowance. So here was the problem. Why was a single man like Tyler frequenting these places and spending his own money for his nephews? Maybe an uncle buying gifts, paying for a photo shoot, or taking them to a doctor's appointment. But why was it so frequent? And why was it spread across so many different unlit facilities? It looked like deliberate evasion, trying not to leave too much of a paper trail in one place. What made me even more suspicious was one specific private pediatric clinic. I had a friend call the clinic pretending to be a family member needing to check a child's vaccination record. We used the name Liam Vance. The receptionist checked the system and politely informed us that there was no registration or medical record for a patient by that name. Yet Tyler's credit card statement clearly showed a charge there from just 2 months ago. Who was he spending this money on? Or were these transactions a front for something else? I buried these puzzle pieces in my mind and waited. Rushing it would ruin everything. Getting Julian's medical report was the key to breaking this wide open. But given the Wellington security, acquiring it through official channels was virtually impossible. While I was agonizing over my next move, an incident occurred at the Vance household. Julian fell ill. It wasn't a major disease but a severe flu. His high fever wouldn't break. The concierge's doctor warned it could develop into pneumonia and recommended a couple of days of hospital observation. Julian initially refused, but he couldn't win against Eleanor's insistence. He ended up admitted to a VIP suite at the Wellington Medical Pavilion, coincidentally the exact hospital where he had taken his secret test. Eleanor, worried sick about her son, brought the nanny and went to the hospital to supervise his care personally. Khloe naturally was the first to rush to his side. Carrying a thermos of organic bone broth she claimed to have simmered for hours. She arrived before even changing her clothes, tending to him meticulously, pouring water, fluffing pillows. Her devotion earned endless praise from the Vance family and even the nursing staff. "Mr. Vance is so lucky," a young nurse gushed. "Your wife is beautiful and capable, and your assistant is so incredibly devoted." Wife. When that word slipped from the young nurse's mouth directed at me, I merely offered a faint smile. To most people's eyes, Khloe, the woman who bore him 3 sons, looked like the real Mrs. Vance. As the legal wife, I felt like an unnecessary visitor. When I visited the room, Julian had just received a fever-reducing injection and was sleeping groggy. Khloe was gently wiping his face with a damp towel. Her movements were practiced and natural. Eleanor sat on the side sofa, watching Khloe with absolute satisfaction and approval. Seeing me enter, the smile on Eleanor's face faded slightly. "Elena, you're here. Julian just fell asleep. It's nothing serious. Thank you for coming, Mother. I just wanted to see Julian and asked if there's anything I can help with." I set down the fruit basket and supplements I had brought. "Khloe and I are here. That's plenty." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "Don't you have your own things to manage? Go do your work. I'll tell Julian you stopped by when he wakes up." An indirect eviction. Khloe turned to me, offering a gentle but strangely distant smile. "Don't worry, Elena. I'll take good care of Julian. You must be tired. Make sure you take care of your own health." I looked at her. I looked at Julian's pale sleeping face on the hospital bed. And I looked at my mother-in-law's undisguised favoritism. Suddenly, this entire scene felt outrageously absurd and bone-chillingly cold. "Understood. I'll take my leave then," I said, turning and walking out without another word. When I reached the hospital courtyard downstairs, I stopped and looked up at the floor where Julian's room was. I knew that right now, Khloe was probably basking in the illusion of being the lady of the house, enjoying everything she had stolen as if it were her birthright. Meanwhile I, the real wife, was shoved out into the cold. No, I couldn't just walk away like this. Julian being hospitalized here might be an opportunity, a chance to get closer to the truth. I thought of Dr. Harrison. He was an expert at this hospital. Maybe he could think of a way. I pulled out my phone and drafted a text. "Dr. Harrison, I apologize for bothering you again. My husband, Julian Vance, is hospitalized in the VIP ward on the upper floors. I am extremely worried about the issue we discussed previously. If it's possible without breaking protocol, could you give me even the slightest hint? Any direction would be appreciated. Thank you so much, Elena." I sent it, not expecting much. Just as I was about to give up, my phone vibrated. A reply from Dr. Harrison. It was just one sentence. "VIP ward, 7th floor, office of the chief of neurology. The chief is one of Julian's attending physicians for this admission. He is very strict but heavily relies on comprehensive patient medical histories. Neurology. Julian was admitted for a fever and flu. So why was the neurology department involved? Did the chief of neurology review his secret health checkup results with the specialists? And emphasizing medical history, was Dr. Harrison hinting that I should dig into Julian's chart? My heart started racing. It was a vague but undeniable directional clue. Julian's medical history, especially the highly sensitive parts, would undoubtedly be strictly encrypted. However, during an active hospital stay, there are always physical records, consultation requests, and medication lists floating around. I needed a way into the doctor's office or access to their internal system. It was nearly impossible. As I was racking my brain, A young woman in scrubs and a mask hurried past me. She was carrying a stack of files. Walking too fast, she accidentally bumped into me and the files in her hands scattered across the floor. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry." The woman apologized frantically, crouching down to pick up the papers. "It's all right," I said, bending down to help her. But as I picked up a few loose test sheets, my eyes froze entirely. At the top of the paper in the patient name field, it clearly read Julian Vance. Most of the information consisted of codes and medical jargon, but I immediately recognized a familiar medical abbreviation. Next to it was a terrifyingly bold red arrow pointing downward, and beside that was a line of hastily scribbled doctor's notes. The handwriting was messy, but I could make out a few key words. Rare, congenital, confirmed, osperia. The remaining words were folded over, obscured. But the word ospermia, absolute lack of sperm, struck like lightning, severing the last thread of hope I didn't even know I was holding on to. The young nurse seemed to realize something was wrong. She quickly snatched all the papers from my hands, stuffed them frantically into her folder, bowed repeatedly in apology, and practically sprinted away. She looked like she was fleeing. I stood rooted to the spot, my entire body turning cold. Felt like my blood had frozen. Aspermia, congenital genetic defect, incapable of reproduction. Julian Vance. If he really was, then Khloe's children, the 3 boys he treasured like royalty, the heirs the Vance family treated like gods, where did they come from? A colossal sense of absurdity and sky-piercing rage instantly swallowed me whole. So for the past 4 years, all the blame I had endured, the cold stars, the grievances, the loss of warmth in my marriage, my husband's love, and even my dignity as a woman, it was all built on a laughable, horrifying lie. Julian Vance, you absolute fool. You were thoroughly played by the woman you trusted and relied on the most. And you treated that con artist and her bastards like royalty. Meanwhile, Elena became the biggest sacrificial lamb and laughingstock in this grand illusion. I needed to see Julian right now. I had to tell him this brutal truth with my own mouth. I wanted to see the look on his face when his world shattered. I turned and marched back toward the VIP wing. My steps so fast I was almost running. Rage and an almost cruel sense of vindication churned violently in my chest. The elevator ascended slowly. The number hit 7. With a ding, the doors opened. I walked briskly toward Julian's room. The door was slightly ajar. Voices drifted out from inside. Khloe's soft voice reading something aloud. Just as I was about to push the door open. "Mr. Vance, are you awake? How are you feeling? Dr. Evans will be here shortly. There are a few things from your previous test results we need to discuss with you in more detail." It was an unfamiliar male voice. Sounded like a doctor speaking in a serious tone. Previous test results. My footsteps halted right outside the door. The room fell dead silent for a few seconds. Then Julian's hoarse, exhausted voice rang out. He sounded much more alert than before. "You mean the tests from last week? The comprehensive screening done here?" "Yes, Mr. Vance." The unfamiliar doctor confirmed carefully but professionally. Some of the results came back. There was a rather significant finding. Dr. Evans is an authority in this field. He will explain it to you personally, but it might be best if you prepare yourself mentally. Prepare yourself mentally. My heart clenched tight. I held my breath and peered through the crack in the door. Inside, a middle-aged doctor in a white coat and glasses stood beside Julian's bed. In his hands was a thick manila envelope. Khloe stood near the foot of the bed. Her face wore a mask of appropriate concern, but her tightly pursed lips betrayed a faint, imperceptible panic. Julian was sitting up against the headboard. His fever made his face flush red, but his eyes had already regained their usual razor-sharp intensity. Except now that sharpness was laced with deep anxiety and a thread of genuine fear. He stared fixedly at the envelope in the doctor's hands. His Adam's apple bobbing. "Where is Dr. Evans? When will he be here?" Julian demanded, his throat dry. "We've sent someone to get him." "He will be here momentarily," the doctor replied, placing the envelope on the bedside table. Mr. Vance, please rest for a moment. I will give me the report. Julian suddenly cut him off. His tone carried an indisputable commanding authority. The doctor paused, looking conflicted. Mr. Vance, the results are quite complex. Dr. Evans specifically requested. Give it to me. Julian's voice rose. It was a mix of a patient's raw vulnerability and a desperate impatience to know the truth. The doctor observed Julian's pale, rigid face, then glanced at Khloe, who looked like she wanted to intervene but stopped herself. Hesitating for a moment, the doctor finally sighed, pulled out the top few pages from the envelope, and handed them over. This is the executive summary of the genetic testing and specialized reproductive analysis. You may review this first. Dr. Evans will explain the specific details and subsequent recommendations when he arrives. The doctor stepped back, seemingly giving Julian some space. Julian snatched the pages as if grabbing a lifeline. His eyes frantically scanned the dense medical jargon and data points. The room was terrifyingly quiet. The only sounds were the faint rustling of paper and Julian's increasingly rugged breathing. Through the crack, I saw the color drain from his face at a visible speed. The feverish red vanished, replaced by an ashen pallor, which then turned a sickly corpse-like gray. His eyes seemed nailed to a single line, or perhaps just a few words on the report. His pupils contracted violently. His knuckles turned stark white from how tightly he gripped the paper, his hands trembling minutely. Khloe seemed to sense something was terribly wrong. She took a half-step forward and asked gently, Julian, honey, what's wrong? Is there an issue with the test? Don't worry so much, the doctor said. Dr. Evans will shut up. Julian growled lowly. His voice sounded like a wounded animal horse, ragged and dangerous. He slowly raised his head. With bloodshot eyes, he glared at Khloe. The absolute shock, suspicion, fury, and earth-shattering collapse in his gaze felt almost physical, threatening to pierce right through her. Khloe recoiled, stumbling a step back. Her face went entirely white. Julian, what? Julian ignored her. He suddenly kicked the blankets off, thrashing to get out of bed without caring about the 4 still lodged in his hand. His gaze was locked onto the middle-aged doctor. Every word was forced out through clenched teeth. What does this mean? What does complete microdeletion of the AFC region mean? What is congenital spermatogenic failure? And what the hell does 0% chance of natural conception based on clinical evidence mean? His last sentence was a near roar. It echoed through the quiet hospital room, piercing the eardrums. The doctor was clearly startled by Julian's explosive reaction, but he maintained his professionalism, trying to explain in the calmest tone possible. Mr. Vance, please calm down. We understand this news is incredibly difficult to accept. Put simply, your genetic tests show a very rare congenital defect. Completely inhibits your ability to produce sperm. From a medical standpoint, the probability of you impregnating a woman through natural means is exceedingly low. It is practically zero. Of course, with modern assisted reproductive technology, Julian didn't hear a word of the latter half. Clinging to the single phrase that had just annihilated him, he brutally cut the doctor off. His bloodshot eyes snapped back to Khloe, who was already trembling violently. The probability is zero. Julian's voice shook violently. Then what about her? He raised a violently trembling finger and pointed at Khloe. Then where the hell did the 3 sons she gave me over the last 4 years come from? The words struck the room like a bomb. The middle-aged doctor froze completely. He looked at the manic Julian, then at Khloe, who looked ready to faint. It was obvious he hadn't anticipated walking into a massive family ethics scandal. Every ounce of blood vanished from Khloe's face. Her lips quivered uncontrollably, and tears instantly welled in her eyes. It wasn't the crying of someone wronged. It was tears born of sheer, suffocating terror and panic. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She just shook her head frantically as heavy tears rolled down her cheeks. "Speak!" Julian violently yanked the 4 needle out of the back of his hand. Blood immediately spurted out, but he didn't even notice. He stumbled forward and grabbed Khloe by the shoulders. His grip so fierce it looked like he was trying to crush her bones. "Khloe, speak to me. Liam, Leo, Luke. Whose sons are they? Who do they belong to?" "I don't know. Julian, you're hurting me. I don't know what you're talking about," Khloe wailed, her words turning into incoherent babble. Her eyes darted wildly. She didn't dare look into Julian's burning gaze. "You don't know." Julian let out a laugh born of absolute peak fury. But the laugh was more wretched than a sob, filled with despair and madness. "The report is right here. Black and white. Cannot get a woman pregnant. So how did my children happen? Tell me. Which bastard were you sleeping with behind my back? Is that it?" Mo. Khloe shrieked, struggling desperately. "They are your children. They really are your children. This report is wrong. The hospital made a mistake. Yes, it's a mistake. Mistake." Julian shoved her away violently, turning back to the bedside table to grab the report. He hurled it violently into Khloe's face. "The highest-tier genetic test at the Wellington makes a mistake. Khloe, do you think I'm a 3-year-old child?" The papers fluttered to the floor. The impact made Khloe's head snap to the side. Her face stung, but what hurt far more was the agony of her glamorous 4-year-old fortress of lies crumbling to dust in her mind. She stared at the papers scattered on the floor, the cold medical conclusions written upon them. Her clear throat, entire body felt like it was plunged into a vat of ice. She forgot to even cry, leaving only an endless void of terror. Looking at her, Julian felt the very last microscopic sliver of hope extinguish in his heart. A tidal wave of catastrophic betrayal and absurdity swallowed him. He thought of the past 4 years. The fatherly devotion he poured into 3 boys. The tolerance and gratitude he showed Khloe. His parents' radiant smiles over their grandsons. And the moments he stood tall, proud that he had heirs to carry on the Vance legacy. All of it, every single bit of it, was a thorough absolute joke. He was a man genetically incapable of having children. He couldn't create life. Yet his brilliant assistant had sworn she loved him, claiming she endured the pain of labor to give him 3 sons. And using that, she boldly infiltrated his home, practically usurping his legally wedded wife. Extreme fury, humiliation, and a crushing despair stripped Julian of his sanity. He suddenly swung his fist and smashed it into the wall. A sickening thud echoed. His knuckles split open, blood running down the wall. "Mr. Vance, please calm down. Quick, hold him. Call security. Page." "Dr. Evans," the doctor yelled, panicking as he rushed forward to restrain Julian. The hospital room descended into absolute chaos. Nurses who heard the shouting sprinted in. Khloe remained collapsed on the floor, covering her face and sobbing hysterically. Her mind wiped completely blank. She had no idea how to respond to this sudden, destructive exposure. Julian was being held back by the medical staff. His bloodshot eyes were still locked onto Khloe on the floor, his chest heaving violently. Then suddenly, he raised a hand and clutched his chest over his heart. His complexion shifted from pale to a horrifying bruised purple. His lips turned blue. His breathing became extremely labored. "He's crashing." The extreme emotional distress triggered an acute cardiac event. "Prep for emergency resuscitation." The doctor's face changed drastically as he barked orders. More medical personnel rushed into the room, and the sharp, piercing alarms of emergency equipment filled the air. Right in the middle of this peak chaos, the hospital room door quietly pushed open. I, Elena Vance, stood at the doorway, calmly watching the absurd, spine-chilling pandemonium unfolding inside. My gaze slowly drifted past Khloe, who was slumped on the floor like mud, shivering violently. It passed over Julian, surrounded by doctors, his face the color of gold foil as he slipped into unconsciousness. Finally, my eyes landed on the genetic test reports scattered across the floor. The truth had finally smashed its way through the tightly shut doors of the Vance household in this devastating, violent manner. And I, the legitimate wife who had been scarred by this lie for 4 years, was finally stepping in to clean up the mess. No, not just to clean it up. It was time to make the people who needed to pay the price pay it in full. The medical team was frantically working on Julian. Nobody noticed when I stepped into the room. I bent down and picked up the scattered test papers. The pages were light, but the weight they carried in my hand was terrifying. I skimmed the cold medical terminology with a completely expressionless face. My eyes stopped at the bold black letters in the conclusion section. Confirmed diagnosis is due to rare congenital AFC region. Complete microdeletion. Probability of natural conception 0%. Recommendation: consider artificial insemination with donor sperm or adoption. Probability of natural conception 0%. Those words were like red-hot iron spikes. They not only pierced through Julian's masculine pride and the Vance family's hope for an heir, but they also took every grievance and humiliation I had suffered over the past 4 years and turned them into the biggest joke in the world. I quietly placed the report on the bedside table. I didn't make a sound. The emergency procedures continued. An oxygen mask was placed over Julian's face, and the EKG monitor let out a rhythmic beep. The wildly fluctuating green line slowly stabilized, but he still looked critical. Once the doctor administered a sedative, he stopped thrashing and fell into a deep sleep, but his brow remained tightly furrowed, his face ashen. Even in deep sleep, he seemed trapped in extreme agony and anxiety. The man who had once ruthlessly conquered the business world, who possessed an arrogant, overwhelming pride, now looked so incredibly fragile and so incredibly pathetic. They say every pathetic person has a detestable side. That phrase suited him perfectly. It was his blindness, his arrogance, and his cold indifference toward his loyal wife that allowed Khloe to slip in. It was why this lie survived for 4 years. But he was still Julian Vance, my legal husband and the man who controlled the future of the Vance empire. This was no longer just a matter of a broken marriage between us. It involved the reputation of the Vance family, the stock price of Vance Enterprises, and the feelings of 2 elderly people who still treated 3 fake grandsons like absolute treasures. Khloe had to pay for everything she had done. But more importantly, I needed to uncover whether this fraud was a solo act or if she had accomplices. Who was the biological father of those 3 children? Was there a larger conspiracy aimed at the Vance family fortune hiding behind this? When the word fortune crossed my mind, the face of Tyler Adams flashed in my head. He had written the coattails of his sister's merit to a rapid promotion within the company. And those bizarre expenses at maternity and pediatric centers. Was it all really just a coincidence? A bold, horrifying theory grew clearer in my mind. What if Tyler wasn't just a beneficiary, but an active accomplice? What if he was the biological father? A chill crept up my spine. Just then my phone vibrated shortly. A message from my private investigator, Cole. Elena, new findings. I dug deeper into those maternity and pediatric clinics Tyler was frequently visiting. I found a very interesting common denominator. The legal entities and major shareholders are different, but they are all backed by the same low-profile investment firm. Tracing the ultimate beneficial owner of that firm leads to one man, Marcus Reed. He is Tyler Adams's best friend from college and currently runs a boutique biotech company. Also, I found some obscure details in Khloe's hospital delivery records. For all 3 births, Julian Vance was signed as the husband, but the emergency contact was always the same. Tyler Adams. According to a nurse from her first delivery, while Khloe was in labor, she tightly gripped a young man's hand and kept crying. Tyler, it hurt so much. At the time, everyone assumed it was just a brother comforting his sister. But looking at it now, Tyler Adams, Marcus Reed, a biotech company emergency contact. The name called out in the delivery room. Every single clue pointed chillingly in one direction. I gripped my phone tightly, my fingertips turning cold. It seemed this play was much deeper and far dirtier than I had imagined. Julian, you thought you were just deceived by a woman's feelings and a fake bloodline. Perhaps you've been caught in a massive, meticulously woven trap for years. And I was the only person standing on the edge of that trap who still had her wits about her. The ICU hallway was dead silent. The only sound was the monotonous beeping of the monitors. I leaned my back against the cold tile wall. The harsh light from my phone screen illuminated my emotionless face. Tyler Marcus, a biotech firm. The fragmented pieces of intelligence Cole sent were frantically connecting in my brain. A younger brother using his own biological sister's body and womb as gambling chips to climb the corporate ladder. A college best friend providing the technical biotech support. A company capable of handling highly specialized medical procedures. If all this were true, it wasn't just an affair being exposed. This was a long premeditated extended corporate heist and personal degradation. Their goal wasn't just the title of Mrs. Vance. They were after the Vance bloodline's legitimacy and future inheritance rights. Khloe was probably just a pawn from the very beginning, carefully groomed and pushed into Julian's bed by her brilliant brother. And Julian's infertility wasn't an obstacle to them. It was a godsend. It provided the perfect, indisputable host body for their social climbing scam. My heart sank lower, but beneath the cold rationality, my fury burned even brighter. How dare they? They treated the Vance family, me and Julian, like absolute fools, playing us for 4 solid years. How would Julian react when he woke up? Given his pathologically arrogant personality, realizing he had been played like a dancing monkey wouldn't just break him. He would seek vengeance at any cost. But when consumed by rage, judgment clouds, and it's easy to alert the enemy, I couldn't let him act recklessly. This had to be handled cleanly and precisely. I had to make sure they paid a price so severe they could never recover, legally or morally. First, I needed ironclad evidence. The genetic report alone wasn't enough. I needed paternity test results linking the 3 children, Julian and Tyler or Marcus. I needed hard physical proof of the money trail between them. I needed evidence that Marcus' company was complicit in the forgery. Called Cole. My words were brief and sharp. Cole, it's me. The situation has escalated. The water is much deeper than we thought. Pull all your resources and do 3 things. First, secure biological samples from the 3 children at the Vance estate without alerting anyone. Hair, cheek swabs, it doesn't matter. Simultaneously, put round-the-clock surveillance on Tyler Adams and Marcus Reed and get their DNA samples too. Money is not an issue, but absolute secrecy is mandatory. Leave no trace. Second, dig into every financial transaction and equity structure involving Tyler, Marcus, and that biotech firm. I want to see if any money from Khloe was funneled in or if abnormal capital was invested under the children's names. Conversely, check if money flowed from the company back to the Adams siblings. Third, audit the original medical records for all 3 of Khloe's deliveries, especially the sperm sourcing records, signatures on surgical consent forms, and the backgrounds of the medical staff on duty. Cross-reference to see if Marcus' company had partnerships or made donations to those hospitals. Cole was silent for a few seconds on the other end. He clearly understood the gravity of the situation. Understood, Elena. This is dangerous territory. I'll use the most secure channels, but it might take a little time. Make it as fast as humanly possible. Julian already knows he can't have children. Khloe's camp is definitely panicking. I'm worried that if they feel backed into a corner, they'll destroy evidence, move assets, or try to flee the country with the kids, I analyzed calmly. Put extra tails on Khloe and Tyler starting today. 24/7. I want to know everyone they meet and everywhere they go. Pay special attention if they try to contact the kids or prep for international travel. Got it. After hanging up, I organized my thoughts. Pushed open the ICU door and walked quietly inside. Julian was awake. He lay there staring at the ceiling. His eyes were hollow, unfocused. He looked like a man whose soul had been violently ripped from his body. Hearing me approach, he very slowly rolled his eyes to look at me. In his gaze lay a dead, barren wasteland, mixed with a thick, impenetrable layer of humiliation and despair. I didn't say a word. I pulled up a chair, sat beside his bed, and kept a quiet vigil. Seconds ticked into minutes. I don't know how long passed before Julian's cracked lips moved. His voice was sore, it was barely legible. "You already knew." "I suspected," I answered truthfully. "Ever since you secretly started getting tested at the Wellington, but I had no proof until today." He pulled the corners of his mouth slightly. It looked like he was trying to smile, but it was more tragic than weeping. "I'm a real joke, aren't I? The biggest joke under the sun, Julian." I said his name evenly. "Now is not the time to wallow in self-pity. If you're a joke, then what was I for the last 4 years? In your eyes, in your family's eyes, and in the eyes of the public, a decorative vase meant to bear children, tossed aside when I allegedly couldn't." His body jolted violently. He looked at me and finally a crack appeared in his hollow gaze. It was shock and a microscopic, painfully belated trace of guilt. "Elena, I save it." Cut him off. "Now is not the time to settle the rotting debts between us. What matters right now is finding out exactly what Khloe did, who is backing her, and what their ultimate goal is. Were they just aiming for the title of Mrs. Vance, or the entirety of the Vance Enterprises' fortune?" Julian was still Julian. Once the initial collapse passed, his survival instinct and cold-blooded corporate ruthlessness began to rear their heads from the rubble. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, they were still bloodshot, but a fraction of his usual sharpness had returned. "The children aren't mine," he said, his voice still trembling as he spoke the words aloud. But he was fighting desperately to maintain control. "Then whose are they?" "Her lovers. Did she just grab some random guy?" "I have a suspect, but we need to confirm it," I said slowly. "Do you remember Khloe's younger brother, Tyler Adams?" Julian's brow furrowed deeply. "I remember. Competent. He delivered solid results on the Brooklyn waterfront project over the last few years. I personally promoted him. Why does this have to do with him? He might be more involved than you think." Suddenly remembering something, his face changed drastically. "You don't think Tyler is?" "There's no hard proof yet. Just a theory." I gave him a condensed version of what Cole had found. Tyler frequenting maternity clinics, the emergency contact records, and his connection to Marcus Reed and the biotech firm. But I kept my orders regarding the DNA samples a secret. After hearing it all, Julian's face turned the color of hardened iron. The veins on his forehead throbbed. If this theory was true, it wasn't just a simple betrayal. It was a blatant, comprehensive trampling of his life, utilizing the bonds of blood. Did they use him as a glorified sperm bank? No, it was worse. They made him a laughable cuckold raising another man's offspring. And one of the subordinates he valued most was likely the mastermind. "Investigate him." He pushed the words out through clenched teeth. His voice smelled of blood. "Uncover everything, no matter the cost. If those siblings really orchestrated this, I will make them beg for death. We will investigate. But you cannot act like a madman screaming for blood right now," I pointed out calmly. "First, you are still in the hospital and need to stabilize. Second, if you spook them and they raise their defenses, they might destroy key evidence or run off with the kids. Then what the hell do we do? Do you not care about the Vance family's reputation or the company's stock price?" Julian glared at me. His gaze was complex. It was probably the first time he had ever looked so closely at his supposedly submissive, useless wife. The woman sitting before him was calm, rational, and articulate. She even possessed an aura of total command over the entire chessboard, something he had never ever seen in me.